Okay, so we're going to start up again.
I'd like
And we're going to come to the rest of memory. And a topic that's very interesting is forgetting. So forgetting can be broken down into two different phases that happen. One is that you can have a problem of accessibility, meaning we may not be able to retrieve the stored memory at all. Even though it's still somewhere in our brain, we lack the retrieval cue to pick it up. And this happens a lot, especially in the example of the lady in red meeting a person she remembers from somewhere else. Maybe having the wrong context for retrieval, not seeing the person in the normal place that they might see them. So, for example, seeing your neighbor out in a shopping mall instead of seeing them on the street that you see every day or in the HDB flats, maybe you won't be able to place them because the retrieval cue that you have is incorrect. Secondly, there's the availability of the memory. Perhaps your memory is no longer there. It may have decayed out or been replaced by something else. And then, even though it might have been present in your long-term store at one point, it's actually gone. And there are a couple different ways that we also think about forgetting. One is in Hebbian theory. This is a theory by Hebb that suggests that we forget when we don't use our memories. So when we don't exercise or retrieve them, our synapses decay and the information and the connections are lost. And Hebbian theory is actually well known in this phrase that cells together, that fire together, wire together, meaning that if you use the same type of memories together, they tend to be retrieved as a block, right? So that's some type of chunking mechanism. And actually, Hebbian theory is actually used quite a bit as a basis for some of the AI theories of learning. Actually, not so recent as I've suggested here. It's been around for quite a long time. And if you take machine learning that we have at NUS, you'll also find out a bit more about perceptron theory and ideas about Hebbian theory there. Okay, interference theory suggests that other acts of remembering or learning can supplant retrieval cues for the original memory. Again, we talked about displacement earlier. That happens in long-term retrieval of memory too. So for example, if you've driven a car in manual shift, it may be difficult to learn how to drive the automatic shift or vice versa. Another example is in being able to type. So if you typed on a QWERTY keyboard for a long time and you've seen people type on a Dvorak and you think it's maybe easier to type on a Dvorak to speed up things, because you've typed on a QWERTY keyboard for a long time, it may be very difficult to learn the new Dvorak keyboard layout, and it could be interfering with your chance to learn. Okay, retrieval failure theory is the final one that we're going to look at. It suggests that we can't retrieve things when the wrong retrieval cue is employed, and we just talked about that earlier in availability, right? And the way we can get around that is, as Joshua mentioned, is to try harder to remember. It means elaborate on what we're trying to put into our long-term memory store. And for example, in trying to remember all of these concepts in the final exam, you can use your visual spatial sketchpad and your visual memory to remember which part of the lecture spatially I'm talking about when you go through the presentation on your own. So we're going to come and jump to another part, which is on models of attention. Here we're looking at two strands of theories that talk about how memory is related to attention. The first is selective attention, which we've already heard of quite a bit from our team on presenting selective attention. So they mentioned the spotlight model and how people can filter out information. So the spotlight model consists of a margin, a fringe, and a focus, and we keep this especially in the case of visual memory where it's more apparent. But it's also the case of auditory memory too, right? So many times people have observed what's known as the cocktail party effect, which means that even in the presence of interfering noise, you as a person can focus on a conversation or overhearing something that you're trying to pay attention to. And so your auditory focus can also do this. So there's a focus, a fringe, and the margin. Okay, Selective attention was also brought about in this picture from recent times, right, where we see that the Prince of Wales visiting us in Singapore is trying to be shown selective parts of the scene of the exercises that are going on, and excluding all of the royal watchers that are on the side. Right? So this is a very good example of selective attention being employed. Okay, so that selective attention, it tells us how we might be able to pay attention to particular things, but it's also the case that many times when we're trying to focus, we have our attention divided in some ways. So we're going to take a look at the divided attention or multitasking. So divided attention we can really view in two different models as capacity allocation, meaning we have some fixed amount of information, resources at our capacity to allocate, versus automatic and controlled processing, which we're going to look at as well. So when we talk about attention as a capacity allocation, we mean that our attention has a set amount of capacity or resource to deal with. And that's mentioned here as arousal bubble that's in the center of your screen. So arousal here just means the amount of attention that we have at our disposal, and that can be due to a couple of things. It could be due to the interest that you have in a particular topic that might manifest itself in having more attention, okay? Or it could be the time of day. Let's say you're more aroused in the morning, and at night you're quite sleepy. The amount of caffeine you might have. Those all influence our capacity to have attention, okay? And then basically there are two other factors in this model that is due to Kahneman in 1973, where he also talked about the enduring dispositions and momentary attentions that are factors that help us, our bodies, decide what things to allocate to our attention. Enduring dispositions means that for a particular person there are things or cues that are enduring, right? Meaning that they persist for a lifetime, that affect the allocation policy. So the cardinal example of that is someone calling your name. This is something that you in particular are tuned to, but other people might not have that enduring disposition to respond to that. So when someone calls your name, in some ways you have no choice but to put some attention to that, because your body, your mind has already built the pathways to automatically respond and focus attention when someone calls your name, whether it's someone you know or whether it's someone you don't know. And momentary attention has to do more with the survival instinct, right? So if something drastic happens nearby, a big noise, a big bang happens, or something quick moves around in your motion, in your space for paying attention, you're obviously going to focus your attentions onto that, right? So these two other factors, along with your capacity for attention or your arousal, influence the allocation policy and helps us decide how much attention to pay on any one of these circumstances, right? Which are shown on the arrows at the bottom. And the other part of this thread about attention is about automatic versus controlled processing. And we find this a lot in the everyday, right? There are lots of things that we do that we take for granted that at one point might have seemed very difficult. So when we were young, putting on clothes, our socks and shoes might have been a bit of a tedious task because we didn't have much motor control. And then we learned how to do that quite automatically, and we don't focus a lot of attention on that. That information has moved into muscle memory and is sort of a reflexory action. It's also the case that we apply automatic processing in these cases when we have done it enough times. So for example, typing on a keyboard or calling someone on the cell phone may become an automatic response. However, when we're doing things that are really complex or novel, things that we're doing for the first time, it requires us to focus a lot more attention. So it requires controlled processing. And then the repeated practice of these skills allow us to convert a lot of these types of controlled processing aspects where we have to focus a lot of attention to automatic ones. So why are all of these models of memory and attention important? Well, because the models of working memory tells us why certain abilities are impaired, right? So in the Stroop effect, we can't process both verbal and visual information in parallel very well, right? And when we talk about multitasking and the cognitive load that's incurred by doing human computer systems, we can understand and support these findings, right? And as HCI practitioners rather, it's likely we'll want to use one of these channels as the primary channel and use the secondary channel to reinforce it. We want to design our methods in such a way to promote recognition then recall. Recall the fact about George Miller's 7 plus or minus 2. We want to make sure that when we're designing things, it helps to aid our ability to deal with the cognitive load. We want to lower that barrier and make it easier for people to choose to do the right things, focus with their working memory on what's important, rather than need to recall from memory. And to provide users with different methods for encoding that information and encoding the procedures. The more ways we can signify something in an action or an operation in more than one method, the more likely it is that someone's going to be able to discover it. So for example, in many operating systems, there's more than one way to delete a file. You could drag it into the trash, you could right-click and say delete this file, or maybe you can just highlight it and push a key like delete to delete it. Okay? All of these are different methods that might help you in different situations to recall what's the correct action to take. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a tangent that's going to tie this together for us. We're going to see that in HCI and problem solving, representations really do matter. And so the way we represent something into memory is very important. We need to make sure we choose the appropriate channel. Otherwise, it can be much more difficult to accomplish a task. Okay, so we're going to look at some videos, mostly credited to Alan Kay. On the bottom left here. This is Alan Kay on learning and computer science. This is a video from YouTube that came quite early. I think this is a digitized version from the 1980s.
Here's an example of a programming problem, and that is, let's take the logo turtle and write a program to draw a circle. And we'll do it with 3 ages of people, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 15-year-old, as representatives from these 3 mentality dominant areas: the body, the visual, and the symbolic. Now, the way you get a 5-year-old to do a picture, to do a circle, is something that Seymour Papert learned long ago, and that is you tell the 5-year-old, close your eyes and make a circle with your body. After they've gone part way around, you say, well, what were you doing? And the 5-year-old says, well, I was going a little and turning a little over and over again. If you type that into Logo, you get a perfect circle. And that's because the 5-year-old knows differential equations. Because the circle is a particularly simple thing in differential geometry, which was only discovered about 150 years ago by Carl Gauss. So a circle is that thing that has constant curvature, so the change in curvature is 0. And the child's body mentality, doing mentality, understands that kind of geometry. So the 5-year-old comes up with a very simple program that produces an elegant circle. The 10-year-old has a harder time, because the 10-year-old is visual and really wants to look at things. He doesn't want to do things with his body so much anymore. And so he wants to draw circles with a compass. And after a while, he'll see that by drawing lots of circles, you'll see that the main thing about drawing circles with a compass is that the points on the rim are always the same distance from the center. So his turtle program picks the pen up, starting in the center, jumps out to the rim, goes 100 there, puts the pen down, makes a mark, picks the pen up, backs to the center, turns 1 degree and does that over and over again. So it's chugga, 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 chug, and you get a perfect circle. Much harder way of doing it, but still a good circle. And of course, I wouldn't be telling this story if the 15-year-old were able to get a circle at all. Because like most adults, he's in the facts and logic stage, and he knows the most horrible fact thought up by the mind of man, which is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. A very bad coordinate system, and even if it were a good coordinate system, it has very little operational significance. So here we see an example of just concentrating on different mentalities in people's skulls, getting vastly different results in doing the program. And surprisingly, the age levels that are supposed to do less well actually do better.
Okay, so that was Alan talking about how to best represent the idea of drawing a circle, right? We have our kinesthetic sense. That's our sense of our body position that we see 5-year-olds being able to do. Right, our visual sense, which 10-year-olds are taught to be visual, to think of geometry as a visual skill. And our facts and reasoning stage is our logical stage that Alan says is the weakest form, which we are taught much later on in life when we're going through secondary school. Okay, and he was one of the key designers at Xerox PARC. He was one of the people who developed the mouse at Stanford. And he's best known for this quote down here on the middle. It says, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." So he has to his credit many inventions, including the invention of the computer language Smalltalk, and in part the mouse and the graphical user interfaces that we are using today. Next, we're going to take a look at this inner game of tennis video. And Alan Kay also cited this video in his extended talk. The Alan Kay on learning and computer science is just part of a longer lecture that he gave. And basically, what happened was that a news team in the US on Harry Reasoner's newscast, he was trying to learn the game of tennis. And the problem was he couldn't learn it very well, and he heard some infuriating rumors going around from colleagues that there was this guy called Tim Gallwey who said, "You can learn tennis if you just don't try so hard." So he had been trying very hard to learn how to play tennis. So he was going to expose Tim Gallwey, and what he did is he sent a news crew, an ABC news crew, down to film this guy trying to teach absolute beginners how to play tennis. And actually, Tim Gallwey manages to teach the most difficult subject, which is a lady who hadn't exercised in 20 years at all, how to play tennis in 20 minutes.
This man teaches that you'll learn a lot quicker and play a lot better if you'll only try less.
The idea is to just let the body do what it's capable of doing. But that's hard, because your mind is always there saying, "I want to do better, I want to do better, I want to get this ball over."
And finally, I'll have some reflections on the inner game of tennis. Let's say you're trying to learn a new skill. First, you'll probably memorize a complicated set of instructions. Next, you'll command your body to obey them. And then you will condemn yourself when your body fails to respond as quickly as you want. It's usually a long, frustrating process. In Los Angeles, there's a tennis pro named Timothy Gallwey who claims he has a better way. He calls his system the inner game. Recently, we invited Gallwey to demonstrate by showing how quickly he could teach tennis to a class of absolute beginners. Some of the pupils were openly skeptical at the start. Among these was a somewhat sedentary, middle-aged lady named Molly Groger.
Help. I need somebody help, not just anybody help. You know I need someone help.
I haven't done anything physical in like 20 years. I could just picture myself as like just chasing balls all the time, you know, never hitting it, just chasing them. And I'd heard about the inner game, but I really didn't think it would work with me. As a matter of fact, I had called yesterday to cancel it because I thought it'd be hopeless, but I was talked into coming.
If we'd have been learning how to walk the way we learn how to play sports, Our dad would have been there saying, okay, now, Tommy, first you put your left foot out and you put your weight in the heel of your foot, then you sort of shift on over. No, don't shift so early. Shift about now. After you've taken this forward past your right foot, then you shift over and you put your weight in your left foot. You understand? But this isn't how it went. Instead, little Tommy sits and he just notices his father walking. He just sees him. He's not even studying it. He just starts doing it. And he falls over. And after he falls over, he doesn't say, oh, darn it, I'm doing so badly, I'll never learn how to walk. I always fall to the right. How come I'm falling to the right? He gets up, he falls the other way. And this isn't just trial and error. This is trial and correction. Trial and correction. But the correction is self-correction. No one's there telling him from outside how to do it. He learns from his own experience, and he learns very rapidly. Now, the idea of the inner game is to learn to play tennis in the same way. To learn to play without always trying to consciously control your actions. I'm going to have Tim hit some balls to me, and as the ball flies through the air, I want you just to watch it. In the very instant the ball hits the court, I want you to say bounce. In the very instant the ball hits the racket, I want you to say hit. So you'll just be saying bounce, hit. All you need to do is watch the ball, okay?
Bounce, hit.
The key of all the exercises in the inner game is to focus the mind's attention somewhere where it will not interfere with the body's ability to hit the ball automatically. You stand here and Tim will throw you a couple, and you just continue doing the same thing.
Should I try to hit it?
Not at first. At first, just say bounce when the ball bounces and hit when you would hit it, but don't hit it. Then after you feel like hitting it, go ahead and hit it.
Okay. Bounce, hit. Bounce, hit. Bounce, hit. Bounce, hit.
Okay. When a player is first learning the game of tennis, and when he says bounce, he's also out of the corner of his eye watching me hit the ball. So even though he's not trying to see how I hit it, the image of me hitting it is going right into his memory. You enjoying yourself?
Yeah, it's really fun.
You like that? Okay, here we go.
I love it.
The cardinal principle in any book written on tennis, about tennis, is to watch the ball. No tennis player really sees the ball enough. And the reason is they get bored. So I try to give them something to see in the ball that's interesting. So we watch the trajectory of the ball, the gracefulness of the line made by the ball as it flies through the air. Always it's the same. Put the mind somewhere where it can stay calm and not get you uptight, but relaxed and interested. Then the body does so beautifully, so beautifully. You might start listening to the ball, Molly. Listen to how it sounds on your racket. Hear that?
Yes.
Hear that one? What did that sound like?
Very dull.
It was like wood. That wood sound. Keep listening and you'll hear the sound that you like pretty soon. Just listen to it. Okay, now listen on this side. Now the grill. Okay. Now be aware that racket is part of your arm. That's it. Just feel it. Don't try so hard. Let it happen. That's it. Do what's comfortable, Molly.
Every time I did start to think, things went wrong.
Just feel the pace.
When you just stop thinking, the body seems to know what to do.
Can you feel it?
Okay, so that finishes our first part on memory and attention. I'm going to go through the next part in just a while, so stay tuned for the next video.